Hello and welcome to this episode of Talking Female Health with Amy and Lisa. I am Amy Connor and I'm with my beautiful friend Lisa Yara. And in this episode, we're really excited to talk about something that we've had discussions about ourselves and really felt that it was important to bring it to the podcast because we see a lot of advances in technology that are set to support us with our health and well-being, which can be a really good thing and be really positive and used in the right way can really help. But there can also be a flip side to it, where we have this over reliance on technology to tell us what our body is also quite capable of telling us. And we talked in our last episode about getting to trust our bodies and really listen to what the body's trying to tell us and trusting that message and that connection that we have created with her. Yet, if we are looking outside of our bodies to other devices, then this can lead to miscommunication, misunderstanding, a lack of trust in ourselves, and also, in some cases, a buildup of health anxiety. And I'm going to give an example here of what happened with one of my clients that I think is quite common for a lot of people, and they'll be able to relate to this. So, I had a client that I was supporting, and she was very unwell at the beginning of the time when we started working together. And she arrived to one of our sessions and she did not look well. She was physically exhausted. You could just tell that she'd overdone it. And when we were talking, she told me that she'd been on a walk with her smartwatch and had tried to achieve 10,000 steps. So she'd gone out and really pushed herself to get to these 10,000 steps. And she described how she'd set off on this track through the countryside and got so far away from home and felt absolutely depleted and had clearly overdone it and had to get herself back. And we had this conversation about why she felt she needed to do the 10,000 steps. And it was this response that I was completely expecting, was that that's the recommended number of steps that we should be doing every day. And she has her smartwatch, and her smartwatch beeps at her if she's not active enough and reminds her that she's not done enough steps. And when we unpicked it all, she was getting pressurized from her smartwatch to move more than her body needed her to move at that point in her life, in her healing journey. And it really made me think about how we can give away our agency to our smartwatches, because they are very intrusive into our lives. I know people that wear them 24/7 and rely on them to give them the information that they need. And another example I've got of the smartwatch culture of just taking away our agency is my husband wears his all the time, despite me trying to encourage him to take it off more. But we will get up in the morning and I'll ask him if he slept well. And he'll be like, yeah, I slept really well and I feel really good. And then a couple of minutes later, he'll be checking his stats on his smartwatch and be saying, oh, actually, I didn't sleep that well last night because it's showing X, Y, and Z and A, B, and C. And I'm just like, but do you feel refreshed? Do you feel like you slept well? Your body knows more than that watch can ever tell you. So don't change the narrative around how you feel because of how or what your watch is telling you. And the smartwatch is the really clear example, I think, for this episode, because so many people have them. And there's an obsession around them as well, to track every single thing that we do. And if we move and we don't tell our smartwatch, or we don't sync our smartwatch, then it's wasted movement. So I wanted to start the episode with the example of the smartwatch, because I think it's something that a lot of people have experienced themselves, or they'll know somebody who is doing the same thing. I know people who are brushing their teeth at the end of the night and they're jogging on the spot because they want to get those stars or whatever it is, stickers of acknowledgement from whatever device it is that they've got attached to them. So in this episode, we're going to dive a little bit more deeper into how these devices and different technological gadgets can be impacting our health in different ways.
Yeah, and as you have already shared, but I just want to make that clear again, is that the overall, our message is that these devices are great.
Yes.
When used with the right intention, and when we check ourselves for applying common sense to how important we deem the information to be. Yeah. Because when you were talking about these 10,000 steps, for example, and I was immediately reminded, I mean, my work centers a lot around the cycle, whether that's the menstrual cycle or the moon cycle, because all beings are cyclical beings, male, female, whatever. And this 10,000 steps a day, every day, is something in our culture. I talk about linear progress, like it needs to be the same every day. Yet, as cyclical beings, and especially as in a female body, so where there are a lot of fluctuations throughout the month, we cannot show up, do the same every day. That's not what we are made for. So it's like it sets us up for quote unquote failure if we try to measure ourselves against standards of linearity. That's why it's so important to look to your body. Do I feel fit for that? And maybe during certain phases, you might only do 2,000 steps a day. And then in other phases, you do 20,000 because you've got so much energy.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And then you've got your 10,000 on average as well.
Yeah.
And what I find, especially with the cycle and with the menstrual cycle now, an over-reliance on these gadgets totally disconnects us from our body and the beautiful interplay of hormones that's going on a monthly basis or like a cyclical basis. And that my personal example is when I caught COVID over a year ago now. And afterwards, I knew that technically I would come to menstruation now. And I lay in bed at night and I experienced some pain in my belly. And I was like, but this doesn't feel like menstrual pain. This feels like ovulation pain. And by then I knew how to trust my body. And for sure, due to COVID, like my cycle had basically stayed, like dropped out for 2 weeks. So I swapped my cycle. And like from before I was bleeding with the new moon and I was bleeding with the full moon, which is 2 weeks. And that is okay. But I knew, because I knew my body and the way ovulation pain feels different to menstrual pain. Yeah. Which I had learned over the years by trusting my body and paying attention to that. And so an encouragement to start looking at, feeling into, sensing into, where am I at? What does my body feel? As you say, like, do I feel refreshed in the morning? If I don't feel refreshed in the morning, and that watch is telling you that maybe this and that wasn't enough or not enough REM sleep and deep sleep and whatnot, okay, that's a different story. But don't let the device tell you how you have to feel.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of the time, especially around sleep, the narrative that we tell ourselves around how we're sleeping is really important to the end result, because I've gone through periods of really struggling to sleep, and I don't use a smartwatch anymore. I made the decision a while ago to not use one, but I would have nights where I would think that I've slept really well, and potentially if I did have the device, it would tell me that the sleep wasn't fantastic. But I'm telling myself I'm sleeping. Like I sleep now. I go to bed and I sleep. And that's a much better, for me, a much better narrative to be telling myself than, oh yeah, I did get that sleep last night, but it wasn't very good sleep. So I need to try and do better tonight. And, getting myself into that state of believing that I may not sleep well. Because when you get stuck in a cycle of something, anyone who has struggled with sleep will know that it is a really hard place to be, because you're exhausted, like you're not functioning at your best. So to be able to trust that you're sleeping and getting the sleep that you need, or the sleep that your body is able to give you at that time, is okay. It doesn't have to be perfect sleep. Sleep is a win. Which is what I say to my husband. Like when he's had trouble in the past, I'm like, but you're sleeping and that's okay. Your body's doing what you need it to do. It's sleeping. Celebrate that and trust that the body's doing what he needs to do. So that is really important, that we
When
have
you were
this.
talking, I was already like, oh my God, all these thoughts around sleeping and not sleeping. Oh my God, I'm already becoming anxious about sleep just from listening to
Yeah.
you. So I know from personal experience how much harder it is when you're in that situation and telling yourself, oh my God, I need to go to bed earlier. I need to sleep better. I need to calm myself down. Now try to calm yourself down. Oh my God, I've got this thing coming up tomorrow.
Absolutely.
So
or,
it exacerbates the whole situation.
Yeah. I'm not sleeping well at the moment, so I'm not going to be good when that happens. And all of the noise that we give ourselves around sleep. So that's a really important one. And personally, I feel from removing the smartwatch from my life, it's only been positive, because I just feel that, and the other thing is that exactly what you were saying, Lisa, like some days you don't need to move as much, or you can move and it's not necessarily steps. You could go and do 90 minutes of wonderful yoga that is going to be doing so much for your body and your mind and that connection with yourself. But your smartwatch isn't going to be giving you the steps that you need, or the calories burnt, or whatever it is for the targets that it's setting you. But it can give you exactly what you need in that moment. And then, as Lisa said, some days you might wake up and think, I'm going to go and walk 10 miles today, because that's how I feel. That's where I am. That's where my energy is. And I want us to get to a place where we don't judge ourselves for that. Because this client that I was talking about, she was really hard on herself. She's like, I haven't been at work for X amount of months. Like this was the narrative that she'd given herself. I'm useless. I can't do this. I can't do that. If I can't hit these 10,000 steps, that's another thing that I failed at. And I really felt for her, because I was like, I get it. Like it's another thing where you're thinking, I'm not good enough. I'm not doing what this device is asking me to do.
And if I may jump in, at some point it becomes this self-destructing pattern that a lot of, especially women and people socialized as women in the society, have of, and now my brain is only looking for other places where I'm failing. So basically setting myself up for another thing I can fail at just to prove to my brain that I'm really a failure.
Yeah.
And that is not happening on a conscious level. I'm definitely not saying that, but there are underlying processes on a subconscious level. And I really want to make clear that this is not blaming anyone for these processes happening. This is happening to me two, for example, where I found fairly recently actually that I have this habit of creating situations in my marriage where at the end I can say, see, my husband really can't love me because I'm unlovable, even though I know better. Like logically, I know better. And like out of the blue, I'm creating this situation just to prove myself that I really can't be lovable because I've heard that told to me when I was young. And so like I'm not doing that consciously, but by now I at least recognize the pattern, and then I can go, oh, it's happening again.
Yeah.
So how can I make sure that I find some compassion for myself again and not go into isolation and into self-hatred, self-blame, all of that, and instead look for what's actually working in my life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the other ways that I see an over-reliance on technology, especially in the women's health space, is when it comes to looking at hormones and imbalances in hormones, and the world of perimenopause and menopause is a huge market now. Like there's so much available that can help you to balance hormones, track hormones. There's all sorts of different devices and testing that you can do. And I'm not saying that this is a really bad thing. I'm not saying that. But my concern around this is that we become over reliant on this testing, on this analysis, to instead of listening to what's actually happening in our body and what our body needs in that moment. And I see a lot of women who are struggling with their health, and they're chasing these tests and thinking that that's going to hold all of the answers to all of their struggles, when for me it's far more important for that individual to create this connection and this trust and listen to their body and what their body is trying to tell them, and give their body some space. Because sometimes I sit and I think about our ancestors and how they have gone through all of the processes that we are going through: perimenopause, menopause, menstruation, pregnancy, all of these things. And they didn't have all these devices. They didn't have all this awareness and research and technology supporting them. Yet they coped. They listened to their bodies. They rested. They gave themselves grace, I think is the word I'm looking for, to honor this process. And for me, there's a bit of fear that with these devices, and it's the same with tracking cycles as well. I think that, again, it's really good that there's devices that can help you track when you're ovulating and everything. But I've spoken to a couple of women recently, friends and clients that are using these devices, and they're saying, oh, the device says I'm ovulating on this day, but I really felt like I was ovulating on this day. Like my body was doing all the signs of ovulation on this day. And to me, I'm like, well, which do you trust? Do you trust your body, who's giving you the signals that you are ovulating? Or do you trust the device? Because there's always room for a little bit of error or a little bit of, data misreading or whatever you want to call it. So my fear is that as we progress as a nation with technology, that we start to rely too much on these devices for answers that come at a cost. There is a bit of a privilege point to these because they're expensive devices, expensive tests. When the reality is if we know how to give the body the space and the attention that she needs so that she can communicate to us what's happening, and we know what to listen for, and we know how to read ourselves and support ourselves, these devices aren't needed. And, my fear is that we get to a point in the future where women are being told that these devices are needed and required, and these tests are what we need to know if we're menopausal and to know whether we're healthy or not healthy. And that scares me a little bit. I'm not saying that they're really, really bad and we should ban them all, but I have this fear that, again, we are being encouraged to look outside of ourselves for answers that we can find within us when we have the right information and when we are giving ourselves the right environment to honor and care for ourselves. And Lisa and I talk about this in practically every episode. We're in a society that encourages us to do that we are constantly encouraged to look outside, to rely on different devices, different products, different needs, other than just actually tuning the rest out, listening to what's actually happening within our bodies, and trusting what we're being told and our intuition and what we need to do to look after ourselves. So really, that is my fear or wariness around these devices, is that we can step into this over reliance, which can lead to potentially an increase in health anxiety if we're relying on the results of these tests to be telling us, the truth, so to speak. Does that make sense?
To me it does, and I want to because there were two things coming to me, and I definitely want to dive into the hormone testing and all of that as well. But with this health anxiety, what I learned a couple of years ago when so I've got a very mix and match family, and my father's wife's children my father's wife is not my mother, and her children were becoming parents, both of her children. And I learned that by now there are these mats that you put under the baby, on the mattress of the baby, that measure the baby's heart rate and all the things you can measure through that mat. And then, of course, camera on the bed and on the baby. And then they were literally sitting at the dinner table, one hand shoving in the food, other hand having the display to look at, is it still breathing?
Yeah.
Is it still breathing? Did it stop? Because of this anxiety of a sudden child's death, which is a thing. And I do understand that parents are increasingly aware that that exists and afraid that it happens. And also, I'm not sure tracking and monitoring every second of a baby's life will help you decrease the anxiety inside of you. I fear that it's quite the opposite, that it will make you more anxious and in turn have less capacity to be fully present with your child because you're so focused on this child must survive. And when I think with what you said about our ancestors, when I think back even to my mother's generation, well, they were leaving us. I recently heard something from a friend's mother, and she said, well, in our days, we started dialing the other person or the other person's house on the phone, and we would place the phone next to the baby and go over, have a party, and every once in a while check in if the baby wasn't crying or whatever. Well, I mean, that might also just be the other opposite that we don't want to go to. But can we somehow find the middle ground that works for us?
Yeah. And like that story that you just shared, like it makes me so sad that level of anxiety is present in new parents when they should be celebrating like the arrival of the baby and all of the
Or
positive
simply
things.
caring as the
Yeah,
birthing person for their own health and recovery.
yes, completely. Like just focusing on everything that needs to be addressed, like you just said, like the recovery, the baby, and just bonding and all of those beautiful things that I envision when I think of a family bringing a baby home. But to have that level of anxiety and for it to be fed through this device that is there specifically for that really, really upsets me. And yeah, it's just so shocking to me that that is a device that is available. But as I said about the other devices, we live in a consumerism society, and if we can um, make money from people's fears, we are going to do that. And I'm not saying that that device is a really bad thing because I'm sure there are cases where it has saved
I
lives
was
and
just about to say, I have an example actually. I wanted to say that the devices are a double-edged sword, and we've got friends whose children had this thing, both of them, when they were born for the first year or even more, where when they fell into deep sleep, they would stop breathing.
Mhm.
And that, of course, can cause a lot of
Yes,
anxiety. And they had to sleep with like this thing that starts beeping once the child stops breathing every night. And in those cases, obviously, such a
yes,
device
yes,
is
yeah,
life-saving.
completely. Yeah. But to me, it's this fear of like creating fear around something that should be really beautiful and really positive and a you know, a really happy time in somebody's life. It should be relaxed and enjoyable, and to market something potentially that feeds on a fear that is there for all mothers, like all parents. There's always going to be this fear of, I'm leaving them in the cot and the worst case scenario could happen. But this is what my fear is about all of these devices, that we become over reliant on them and give away the joy of life by trusting them too much and not feeling the messages and the wisdom of the body um, in the ways that can help us to just enjoy life more. And, going back to the smartwatch example, there's so many people I know that exercise and they're constantly chasing their personal best time and they're beating themselves up because they didn't, it's been shared on a network where other people can see and they were a bit slower or whatever. And to me, it's the celebration of the body being able to move and that wherever you were on that day, you were able to go and do what you did. And that is what should be celebrated. And when I go into my fitness classes at the gym, for me, I don't take my phone. Like any excuse where I don't have to be attached to my phone, I'm taking it. And everybody is there, like on their watches, like tuning in to all sorts. And then we have certain classes where there's relaxation at the end, and people are still there, like connecting in with their phones. And it just is taking away so much from being present with your body and with others as well. So I feel that, like you say, there's that real double-edged sword with it because there's some really, really good things. If you're somebody who is wanting to increase your health and maybe lose a bit of weight or whatever it is for the goodness of your health, and you're being encouraged and motivated and supported by these devices and the community that they create, that can be a really good thing. But then also, you don't want to be putting yourself down or feeling that you're not enough because you're not improving every single time. Because, as Lisa said, life is not linear. Like, it doesn't work like that. And these devices don't account for that at all.
And there's even people who thrive on competition and constantly competing against I know my husband is one of those, but he would never beat himself up if he doesn't reach what he did yesterday, for example. And I think that especially women and people socialized as women have this tendency to self-destruct. And let's not forget, fear and competition sell things.
Yes.
So it's not just the things that then create fear, but there is fear. That's why we buy the things, and then that increases our fear so that we can buy even more things. And it's a similar place, I think, in the hormone testing world. Things like what gets said is to a perimenopausal woman, you have a lack of progesterone, as if that's a disease.
Yes.
You have a lack of progesterone. Well, in case you as the watcher or listener don't know what happens in perimenopause, the way our body produces progesterone is through ovulation. In perimenopause, we ovulate less, hence it's only natural that our progesterone levels decrease. So it's not a lack of progesterone, but it's part of a natural process that's happening. While, of course, a low level and an imbalanced ratio between estrogen and progesterone can make symptoms appear. That's true also. It's not per se a lack of progesterone.
Yeah.
And one other thing that these tests do not necessarily, like, they don't necessarily show the truth of the situation. And as an example, I recently attended an online conference on insulin resistance. And when people get tested for insulin resistance, they basically, what you do is you drink a certain amount of fluid that contains a lot of sugar. And then 2 hours later, your blood sugar level gets tested. And they look at how much has it sunk again? Is it within a certain range or not? Is it higher than you are insulin resistant? And if not, you're fine. Now, the thing is, and they said that in the conference, and I certainly have never thought about that before, but I found it very striking, is that what would be far more effective in terms of understanding what's at hand is to drink that sugary fluid and then measure not only the blood sugar level, but also your insulin level every half hour, so that you can see and how much insulin is actually needed to get your blood sugar down. Because just because your blood sugar is within a normal range at the end of the 2 hours, if your body had to produce a high amount of insulin, it still means that you are less sensitive to insulin and therefore insulin resistant. But you wouldn't think about it that way if you had just taken that one test. And so, like, even or what often happens with thyroid issues, what gets tested is only the TSH value without looking at how much free T3 is in your system. And like, if this is foreign language to you, I'm really sorry, but there is the TSH is indicating whether or not your brain is signaling to the thyroid to produce more hormones. And then you've got T3 and T4 in your blood, and the T4 is inactive thyroid hormone, and the T3 is the active thyroid hormone. So it might be that you have a lot of thyroid hormone in your body, but your digestive function isn't working properly, and that's where they get activated, is in your gut. And when you've got gut issues, then your body may have enough thyroid hormones, but the inactive ones, it isn't able to convert into the active ones. And then it's a different area that you need to address in that case. And so, like, it's always important to get the perspective on what did I measure? At what point in my cycle did I take the hormone test, for example? And is that actually serving me in the answer the answer I look to, or the answer I want to have, the question that I want to solve?
Yeah.
Just as another layer in all of this, why we always need to apply common sense and the connection
absolutely.
within.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of the time when you're having tests, they are just looking at that specific moment of time in your body. So sometimes if you're having a test and you're stressed because you've had to get to the hospital to have the test and parking was a nightmare and you're running late and like everything's really stressful
And you haven't slept well.
Yes, yeah, and like hospitals are a nightmare and like they're not the most relaxing of places anyway. Like all of that can come into impact on certain test results. And you've got to be aware of that and acknowledge that. And sadly, sometimes that isn't the case. That we can get these results that seem to be abnormal or a little bit worrying or whatever it is, and that isn't the overall picture. So again, it just goes back to creating a relationship with your body and listening and trusting that even when you're told information, that doesn't necessarily have to be a 100% reflective truth of what is happening in your body as a reality for you. And that it doesn't have to be a bad thing either. I think that's really
And to
important.
maybe briefly refer to the last episode, if you feel there is something happening in your body and the test says you're all right, trust your body too,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
keep on looking for the answers.
Yeah, it's so important that you don't give agency away to other devices, people, tests, whatever it is. Like, we're not saying that they're always wrong, not at all. We're not saying that. But what we are saying is that a big part of the picture is listening to the body, because the body holds all the wisdom. And you need to start to trust in that process, because a lot of the time these devices are giving a different narrative to that this is what's happening and what you're experiencing in your body, that this is what's actually happening because this device has said this. Yeah.
As a summary, I would say allow these devices to serve you in your health and well-being. And when you notice it's no longer serving as in positively contributing to your health and well-being, making you anxious and attached and distracted, and that's the moment when you need to inquire about the relationship between you and the device, and if it has become the leader of your life, and if you can bring it back to the place where it's serving you in a helpful space, but you are still in your own agency.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good advice. And I think one more thing that I want to bring in before we close is overuse of the devices. So if you are testing your hormones every day, or whatever it is that you're doing, it can be really like what we talked about with the sleep. It can be really easy to present yourself with a narrative that, oh my gosh, that's slightly higher than yesterday, or that's slightly lower than yesterday, so there must be a problem. What have I done? Da, 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 da. And you can get into this anxious state quite quickly, and it's really easy to do, as Lisa said. Like, sadly, it's a normal thing in our society for us to all have these responses. But just to have that awareness that this isn't gospel. This reading is a little bit of information that I'm going to take towards the overall of what is happening for me. And I don't have to create huge amounts of panic or anxiety from this one reading? If I feel okay, if I'm feeling that everything is okay, I don't have to look for problems. That's maybe not the best term to use, but I think sometimes when we have all these different avenues of information, it's really easy for us to look for problems that aren't there.
Well, that's what our brains do, by the way. That's a natural response of your brain to keep yourself, to look out for danger.
Yes, absolutely. And the more information that you're throwing at yourself, the more chances you have of potentially becoming more anxious. And as we've said, being in this state of anxiety isn't good for your nervous system, it isn't good for your overall health. And it's something that we really want to avoid as much as possible. Yes. Oh,
So, in case you do use the device in a way that's serving you, we are curious. Let us know in the comments what you are using and how it is helping you in your life. Because again, this is not about good or bad. This is about weighing different options and looking at how we can use it in a positive way to enhance our well-being. So we are curious. What is it that you are using?
Yeah, I'd love to know that.
And
Yeah,
also, if there's anything that you want to ask us because you want us to clarify because it wasn't clear, or if you've got anything you would like to share with us, do that in the comments. Or if you don't feel like opening yourself up to the World Wide Web, then by all means, get back to us individually with our through our email addresses.
absolutely. And thank you so much for spending this time with us today. We've really enjoyed this discussion and we hope you have too. And we look forward to connecting with you again in the next episode. See you later. Bye.